Hey folks, BlackCross here, and welcome to another video game review video. And today's video is going to technically consist of 3 games, but it is still one whole game because it was on a disc, and that is the Banner Saga Trilogy. Yes, I finally get to talk about this game because technically, for those of you who had watched it, in my last year's bucket list games that I wanted to play for 2020, this one was one of those games. And I didn't put it on this year's list because technically I had started on it, technically at the time of recording of that. I did Banner Saga 1 and 2, but I hadn't started on 3. And I finally got up to doing 3, and I beaten 3. Which means I've beaten all parts of Banner Saga, and I'm going to tell you about my experience with this game. But before we get into that, I want to go ahead and tell you something else about this game. And that is, how do you describe this game? How do you describe this game? That is going to be the hardest part to do because I don't think there's a clear way to explain how this game works, because it's kind of a multitude layer, if you will. It's part RPG tactics game, part life simulator, not really life simulator. Think of Oregon Trail, that type of way, you know. And it has like a whole bunch of build up to this game, you know. You go from the first one, and it's kind of standardized, but then you go to the second one, and it's like a whole nother level, and then you think to yourself, no way it could go any further, and then the third one, it goes even further, and it's like, dear gosh. So this game is really in-depth. It's kind of insane as to how deep this game goes in terms of the technical standards of a game, and the best way to explain it is, like I said, it's an Oregon Trailer tactical RPG game. You know, you're going on this trail and stuff with the caravan and everything, and, you know, you're battling armies and enemies and stuff like that. You're leveling up your characters, you're attaining items to equip and stuff like that. So it's this multitude of levels, but I do want to take it step by step before we go, like, spiraling out of control, because these levels are actually difficult. So let's first talk about the story, and then we'll talk about the progression of the gameplay that the game goes on. So the story itself, basically in the Banner Saga, the gods are dead. That's literally what it first tells you. The gods are dead. In that world, the gods are no more. There are no gods. No one to save you. And supposedly the sun has stopped moving. It has completely stayed in the position that it has. It is neither risen nor has it fallen. It has stayed in that position, and supposedly this darkness is on its way to devour the entire world itself. So in other words, Ragnarok, apocalypse, whatever you want to call whatever situation they're in, but you go into like this multitude of different storytelling positions. You know, when you first start off the game, you first start off looking at a view of the character known as Udon, who happens to be a Thrall, which are these giant horned beings that are more or less somewhat like Vikings slash I don't know how else to explain it, but they're basically traveling through from their latest escapade, their latest adventure, trying to get into another location. Then it jumps from that story perspective to the main story perspective, I think, in my personal opinion, main story perspective, being that with Rook and his daughter, Italy. Now, in this particular story aspect, that's basically where the story starts to progress into the direction that it needs to go, being that of, you know, the caravan trying to make it from point A all the way to the ends in order to seek protection slash shelter slash whatever. And of course, as the story continues to go forward, it goes deeper and deeper. Sort of like it digs deeper into each individual character arc. And that's almost impossible levels to do, especially when you get levels of characters in this saga alone. You know, people think that Kingdom Hearts character depth is complicated. This right here is a lot more deeper. And I think the purpose of that is to convey the player of the choices that they're going to have to make throughout the entire game. In this entire game series, you make choices, and those choices reflect all the way to the end of the game. And they truly do affect. You know, there's some people that theorize that, oh, these choice dialogues and stuff like that, they affect certain elements, but they don't fully affect the main point of the game. In Banner Saga, all your choices will affect towards the very ends of the entire saga. It keeps track with everything you do and how you answer them and how you did them. It affects everything, and it's so mind-boggling as to how all these different directions and all these different ways that the story ends and begins and alternates and stuff is overwhelming at times, especially if you're on the level of a completionist. You know, you unlocked it, you beaten the story and everything like that. Then you go back and try to unlock an alternative method. You unlock an alternative way. There are multiple ways to play this game, all with certain benefits, all with certain consequences. This level of storytelling is so insane. In fact, while I would tell you about the main game itself, the reality is the gameplay doesn't really affect that major in terms of the game. The real benefit, the real effect that affects in the game is the way that you choose in terms of how the story progresses. For example, there are no technical permadeath through the main game. In other words, you know, through the main game battle mechanics and stuff like that, no character actually dies. However, the choices that you make could result into killing a potential party member that you have with your team, with your overall caravan and stuff. Those choices will either benefit you or will make consequences. For example, the first official character that got killed was a thrall by the name of Garov. And I hated that because he was such a strong character, and I really enjoyed how powerful and brute force this thing was. Basically, he had a technique called Tempest, where he basically took his giant sword and swinged it around him and took down like an entire row of enemies almost right around him. It was so powerful of a move at the time, and I was like, I have to keep him up as much as possible. And a choice that I made where he had hold of a wagon that was on the verge of falling. The choices that I made that I thought that would help benefit, you know, I was trying to yell at him and tell him to let go. He never let go, and instead he fell with the wagon and thus killing him. So the choices that you make in this game do affect in a high level of consequences. So depending on what party member you have at the time, whatever decision you make that coincides with that party member could cost you. So there is that level of detail. So even if you're not good at the gameplay, you don't have to worry about that. Your main focus should, however, be worried based on your overall dialogue. In fact, your dialogue choices could also affect how often you go into battle. So, for example, as you're journeying through the caravan and stuff like that, you can alternately choose which path to go through, whichever you think is easier versus which one you think is harder. You could either make it easier on yourself and avoid as much battle as possible, or you can make it harder on yourself and go straight forward and make all sorts of decisions in which causes you to fight more battles. So those consequences do reflect on you. And not only that, the consequences of your dialogue also features based on how much renown you get, which is sort of like that of your experience, which we'll talk to that a little bit. It could also affect how much food sources you'll get. It could also give you more claysmans and warriors and stuff, versus whether or not you could lose that many more people that could benefit from you. So it's literally like an overall building arc of storytelling that reflects itself in this game. It's really insane. And then again, the only other game that I played that was close to this is probably that of The Witcher 3 with its 3 multiple endings. But it's not to this level of like, I don't know, it's just the level of consequences versus benefits that comes with this game is so insane. In fact, I actually went out of my way to play through the first Banner Saga and completely platinum it, which I did, But my gosh, those choices. You literally have to think to yourself, okay, if I do this, it may actually do this, or if I don't, I might regret it. So you have to think like as though as if you're actually in that position and be like, okay, how do I go about this? Thankfully, though, there are actual resources that you can look into online if you're interested in one to completely beat the Banner Saga Trilogy. It's mostly on Steam, but I will put a link in the description where it tells you a full-on walkthrough of not only the main story, but also of other smaller stuff that can happen as to the consequences or the benefits that they can give you. Whether they give you more renown or food sources, whether or not you might potentially lose a character or gain a character, so on and so forth. So like I said, the amount of build-up this thing has in terms of the story layout, followed by the decision making, followed by the consequences or the benefits, is so insane that it's almost impossible to drop it down. In fact, really, the main story itself is really interesting in my personal opinion. Like I said, the caravan themselves is just leaving from their homeland in order to seek shelter. You go from individual fort to individual fort looking for shelter, and as you continue forward and forward, you realize that the world is falling apart. The world is slowly being consumed by this overlooming darkness that is slowly swallowing the entire world. And when you get to the final end parts of the game, being that of Banner Saga 3, you start to realize that the end is near. The end is coming. You are going to die one way or another. So you're doing everything you can in order to survive whatever onslaught this is. And again, the in-depth storytelling is so insane. It's just, I really love how this story is. I really love how in-depth they went with it. I love how every decision you make could cost you or it could benefit you. Whenever it gives you a benefit, it helps you in the long run of the game. When it backfires, it really diminishes you. So, I mean, we're talking like a level of storytelling and decision making like I have ever seen. I'm sure some people will say there are other ones, but this one's pretty close. This one's a pretty deep one. Now let's talk about the gameplay. This is where things get a little bit hard to take in, but we're going to take it one step at a time. So let's first talk about the actual caravan part itself, the Oregon Trail portion of the game. So, you have several layers of stuff to go by. You have the amount of days that you have food. Now, this is actually a small portion that is crucial depending on the overall thing that you have. So, your food sources is not calculated based on how much food you have. It is based on how many days that food source lasts. So the more food source you have, the bigger that number is going to grow and continue to help you in the long run. The lower that number is, the harder things are going to get. For example, if you have no food source whatsoever, your morality not only lowers, but the amount of claysmen and warriors you have with you will diminish as well. In other words, people are dying from starvation. So you got to keep up with your food source as best you can, whether it's by purchasing them from a merchant using your renown, or making decisions that will help benefit you by salvaging up more meds and food sources and stuff as possible. The second thing is, of course, the morale meter. Should that morale meter go below a standard morale, you will start to feel it. In other words, you will lose a little bit of morale, followed by losing people in the process of it all. People will start dying left and right. People will start leaving the caravan. You will just have like half your caravan disappear on you without realizing it. Now, keep in mind, these caravan peoples, while they may not affect the main party, they actually can affect how the whole caravan progresses throughout the entire game, the entire story for that matter, because when you go into battle, you can have your warriors put up a defense, and that will actually help reduce the amount of enemies you have to put up with in the main gameplay mechanic itself. So yeah, having as many clave warriors as possible is important because that will actually help make it easier on you when you go through the game. And so that right there is just an in-depth thing. So you have to keep up with not only the morale, but also keep up with how much clave warriors you have, followed by how much food source you have. But also too, all your stuff that you do, whether it's dialogue options or stuff like that, it can also benefit you in terms of renown. Renown is sort of like your experience. This particular set, known as Renown, gives your character level ups and abilities that they can learn later on in the game series. For example, in the first part of the game, Banner Saga 1, you only level up your stats and get small attribute abilities based on the stats that you level up. For example, you have your armor, you have your strength, you have willpower, you have resistance, and these individual things contribute towards the main gameplay itself. And by leveling up those stats, they help benefit in the long run. For example, stat reductions, preventions of like receiving damage, giving you bonus abilities and stuff like that. Different bonus points ups and stuff like that, percentage ups and everything of that nature. So it's very calculate in that field. For example, in the first one, like I said, it's just mostly concentrating on the stats. The second and third game, however, gives you individual ability ups. For example, when you go into the second game, you are granted a second ability or a third ability depending. So in other words, other thralls can learn Tempest as well. Other characters can learn different sets of moves and stuff based on their class that they have, so on and so forth. So these different abilities help in the main game. In the third one, however, you get what's called a title. This title, like say for example, Rook the Quiet or Ivor the Mountain. These particular titles give you an amount of bonuses that they pile up on top of the character next to their main stats. So you have the main stat itself, then whatever contribute stats that they have that helps benefit or reduce damage receiving that is added into the game. And then you have another level of character building in terms of stat buildings that add an extra percentage to the character itself. So we have multitudes of level, each one going higher and higher. So you think to yourself, there's no way my character is going to get any higher than this. You know, you look at the stats and you're like, this is it. This is all I can increase. But that's just the stat. That's just the base stat. Based on which ability you have and which selection of abilities you have, can contribute towards that main stat that they have and increase it that much more. So it definitely grows as you continue progressing through the game. So while in the first one it may seem basic, the second and third one adds on an extra layer or two that makes the game more interesting. Now let's go on to the main game itself. So the main game is of course a tactical RPG, where you have your characters and you move them in certain spots in order to tackle on the enemy. You know, some of them are archers, which can attack at long range. Some of them are like the normal swords or shield holders, followed by thralls that attack close range and stuff of that nature. So you have different classes and different abilities and different people that you want to like pick out and think about, okay, how am I going to use this in my team? How am I going to use that in my team? And so on and so forth. This overall, it's basically a giant chessboard. And I hear this a lot, actually. A lot of people compare Banner Saga's battle mechanic like a chess game. You have to think about how you're going to use your pieces in order to advance towards the other side of the field. And it's just, oh my gosh. Sometimes this game can be relatively easy and simple to get through, but sometimes it can be extremely difficult at times. Sometimes brutally unforgiving. So we got like this level of gameplay where you're moving your characters and you're picking out different abilities. You're trying to carefully move your characters to where they can be used beneficially in order to tackle on the enemies, to knock them out and stuff like that. And in the first segment, you know, you have where you go into the game and everything like that. You end up having to fight multiple battles and stuff. Well, again, depending on the number of clavemen you have, you can reduce the amount of numbers of enemies you have to deal with by having your army put up their shields and stuff, to where that way you don't deal with the full blunt of an army coming at you. If you just go full on head charge into them, then you will have a harder time. So best way to explain it, the choices are hard, easy, and all that stuff. So depending on how you want to go through the game depends on the choices you have during combat. For example, like I said, if you go full on charge head first, you will face a full blunt army. Depending on how much shield protection you have, depends on how many enemies will actually tackle you, and you don't have to deal with a full blunt army force that could potentially demolish you. This game alone right here is so insane, and I definitely would recommend it for anyone. But however, though, there is a situation that I would say, and that is that this game can be hard. So depending on who you are, you may not be as tactically advanced to handle this game. So this may not be your ideal of a game. In other words, if you don't do critical thinking, then this game is not for you. This is definitely heavily induced, like as though if it's like sort of a Dungeons and Dragons type thing where you have to literally think about, okay, what could happen if I make this choice? The choices I make will affect the overall outcome. So in other words, if you're not big into heavy story buildups and stuff like that, chances are this game is not going to be for you. But if you are into that, if you're into the whole in-depth story building, in-depth character building, stuff like that, this game is for you. I promise you that it is good. However, though, I will say that there was a couple of things that I did notice. Problem number one, there were times that the game did kind of lag, and it definitely had that problem. It had a little bit of a lag issue that I felt at times. It's not bad, but there were times that I was like, yeah, I can feel it definitely hitting hard. It's just, holy shit. And keep in mind, this is all 2D dimensional. This is sort of flash animation. Now, record, it's good flash animation, mind you. This looks stunning. In fact, personally for me, looking at the elements and the designs of the game, it kind of reminds me of that of Sword in the Stone in a way. Disney Sword in the Stone. The way they kind of look and stuff, the way they've been drawn and everything like that, it makes me kind of think like that. I know that's not exactly what the intentional ideal was, but I love the art style. But yet, for some reason, there are times when the game just kind of lags. And yeah, it can affect the game. And then there are other times where you try to select the abilities, but for some reason they don't fully get selected. So you kind of have to push the directional buttons multiple times before you make a choice to see if it'll even let you make a choice. So sometimes you can make the two alternative ability selections, but sometimes you won't. And this is where it gets kind of confusing for me, because it's like, okay, I can do it for some characters, but why can't I do it for this character, you know? Or why can't I do it for any other character and stuff like that? So it almost feels like it's restricting you at times at later parts in the games. And I don't know if it's because of how the gameplay changes a little bit or something like that, but it definitely does feel like as if there's a little bit of a resistance in terms of the registering in the menu of the game itself. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Then again, this was released on Steam first, and then it got released on consoles such as PS4, Nintendo Switch, and I'm pretty sure the Xbox One also got this as well. I'd be surprised if it didn't. I think it got like a digital version only. So the Banner Saga Trilogy, where would I put this? Again, this is not going to be for everyone. However, though, if you are into this type of game style where you have to think critically about your decisions, think about how you're going to be building your individual teammates and stuff like that, very heavy management skills and everything like that, this game would definitely be for you, and I would definitely give this a 5 out of 5 if I could. I would give this a 5 out of 5, but there are some things that does kind of slow it down. And keep in mind, this game will be hard. Depending on your overall progression in the game, it will get difficult. So there is that unforgiving factor and everything like that. So I would give Banner Saga Trilogy sort of like a 4 out of 5. Yeah, 4 out of 5 for me. I would definitely recommend this for people who definitely want to have that feel of a game. And especially for people who might be interested in it after me saying the phrase that is sort of like Oregon Trail in a way, where your decision making could consequence you or benefit you in the long run. It kind of has that feel. So for some people, I would definitely recommend this, but not for everyone. So definitely a 4 out of 5 for me. Well, that's all the time that I have for this video. Thank you so much for watching this video. Let me know in the comments below. Have you played any of the 3 Banner Saga games when they were released only digitally? Keep in mind, they have a physical version, and you can get this, but much like how most digital-only games are, depending, when you purchase this game and you put the disc in there, it will tell you to download the 3 patches that it has for each individual game, but you still need to have the disc in order to play that particular game. So depending on who you are, you may prefer to get the digital only. For some, they may want to get the physical as well. I went on ahead and got the physical as soon as I heard that it got one, and it does have a little bit of a bonus that it comes with and stuff. For example, this is, after all, the Banner Saga Trilogy bonus edition, which comes with a whole bunch of other stuff. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I shall see you in the next video. This is BlackCross signing off. Catch you guys later.